2018 resulted in one of the smallest lists in my entire Chronicles series, and the blame for that sits entirely on one game, PUBG. But strangely enough, that made this year stand out. The games I did play weren't just fun, they completely pulled me into their worlds. Whether it was memorizing streets, following characters through years of stories, or slowly growing from a complete nobody into a hero, these games reminded me why I love getting lost in virtual worlds. With that context out of the way, let's get into the ranking. These are my favorite games I played in 2018. Kicking things off at number 8 is Tales from the Borderlands. I've played a lot of different Telltale games over the years, but only a few have stood out enough to actually make my retrospective lists. What surprised me about Tales from the Borderlands is that underneath all the jokes and ridiculous moments, it actually made me care about its characters. The comedy was exactly what you want and expect from a Borderlands game, but the story itself was engaging enough to keep me invested from beginning to end. This is actually the only Borderlands title I have ever finished, apart from the original Borderlands game that I wrapped up back in 2017. The story was a great ride from start to finish, and Handsome Jack was easily the most memorable character throughout the entire experience. At number 7, we have South Park: The Fractured But Whole. This was a great sequel to The Stick of Truth. While I really enjoyed the simple, straightforward gameplay of the first game, The Fractured But Whole offered a lot more variety. I loved superhero narrative. It took some brilliant jabs at the Marvelous Cinematic Universe, and creating a completely ridiculous superhero backstory for the new kid was hilarious. The gameplay itself felt much more varied this time around. You need different companions to progress through different puzzles, and you have way more hero classes to choose from, which actively changes how you play. The new grid RPG system also made the combat feel much more active and engaging. The comedic writing is absolutely top tier in both games, but I think I can confidently say that Fractured But Whole is the stronger overall experience. My only real complaint? I definitely miss Timmy's Bard songs. Coming in at number 6, Life is Strange. After playing through some of the Telltale library, I became a massive fan of the genre, choice-based games that focus on telling great stories. I really liked Max as a protagonist, and loved exploring her friendship with Chloe. The game's aesthetic was beautiful, and learning about their history alongside the mystery surrounding Arcadia Bay was incredibly interesting. The mystery also becomes much darker than I expected, and the final choice the game forces you to make at the very end is genuinely difficult. It's a beautifully atmospheric experience that completely holds your attention. Number 5 goes to Quantum Break. After falling in love with Alan Wake, I knew I had to explore more of the Remedy universe, so Quantum Break was a total no-brainer as my next project. I've always loved time-traveling stories, so a game built around manipulating time immediately had my attention. Getting to use Jack Joyce's ability to manipulate time while watching live-action television episodes woven directly into the story made the entire experience feel incredibly unique. The most interesting part was how the game lets you make choices as the villain, only for those decisions to come back and affect you later as a protagonist. The entire experience felt very experimental, especially because you weren't just watching the consequence of your decisions, you were actively living with them. While it's ultimately my least favorite game I've played from the Remedy universe, it is still entirely worth playing. Seeing Jack show up years later in Alan Wake 2 felt incredibly rewarding, and as a new Alan Wake fan, spotting all the hidden references throughout this game was incredibly exciting. Moving on to the number 4, Risen. Most people know the developer Piranha Bytes for their legendary Gothic series, but back then, I hadn't played that franchise at all. I'm actively fixing that mistake right now, as I'm currently about 50 hours deep into the Gothic remake. But my very first taste of the glory days of Eurojank was Risen. This game was completely different from anything I had ever played before, because of the hardcore zero-to-hero progression style it implements. You start as an absolute weakling, who can get easily killed by basic rats, and eventually, you grow into a powerhouse capable of saving the world from a titan. Risen made me completely fall in love with the concept of starting as a nobody and earning your strength little by little. Unlocking new skills required training points, which you then had to physically spend by tracking down and talking to specific trainers in the world to learn new abilities. The game constantly rewarded paying attention to the world around you. I also loved how the map was handled. You don't start with the map. You have to manually find or obtain maps for different locations before navigation becomes easier. Because of that, you're actually learning the layout of the world through your own experience instead of staring at a minimap. Hunting for quest givers or specific locations felt amazing, because there were no map markers or compass arrows holding your hand. You weren't just following instructions, you were actually learning the world. It was a brutal, unique, and incredibly cool experience. Entering the top 3 is Assassin's Creed Revelations. This was the final chapter for Ezio Auditore, and it was awesome to see him as an older, wiser master assassin, still doing heavy work for the Brotherhood. On top of that, it was great to finally have an Assassin's Creed game on PC with proper achievements. Being able to push for that 100% completion really scratched that collector's itch for me. However, out of the entire Ezio trilogy, this one is my least favorite, and honestly, the biggest reason for that is the god-awful tower defense minigame you were constantly forced to participate in. It was such a massive pain. However, the conclusion to this game is amazing. Ezio finally finding Altair's remains and realizing his entire purpose was simply to relay a message to someone else. That someone being Desmond Miles, the guy currently living his memories, was spectacular. Looking back, it's crazy how invested I was in the modern day storyline at this point. These connections felt incredibly meaningful, and seeing Ezio finally understand his role in this much larger story was an amazing payoff. It's honestly disappointing to see how much that storyline has faded over the years. Ezio had a beautiful, well-earned farewell, and he takes a well-deserved 3rd place. Taking the silver medal is another emotional farewell, The Walking Dead, the final season. This game holds a special place for me, because it was the very first game I ever bought on release day. I loved the series so much that I couldn't bear to wait a half a year for a discount. I wanted to pay full price and support the creators. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a complete roller coaster of a launch. Right after episode 2 dropped, Telltale suddenly went bankrupt and the game was effectively cancelled. I was genuinely worried. I had followed Clementine's journey for years, and the thought of never seeing her story come to an end was devastating. Luckily, Skybound Entertainment came to the rescue, funded the completion of the project, and allowed us to finally get the closure we wanted. I loved the setup for this final season. Clementine was now in her late teens, and playing the game constantly reminded me of the very first game because Clem had essentially stepped into the exact role Lee had. She was no longer the child being protected, she was now the protector of a young kid, AJ. The community run by teenagers was a great setting, and seeing a familiar face from season 1 return as the antagonist, Lily, was wild. But the real kicker was the ending. When Clem got bitten, my heart sank. I remember getting so emotional, thinking her journey was ending the same tragic way Lee's did. But then, the game completely flips the expectation. AJ refuses to kill her, manages to amputate her leg in time, and Clem survives. Because of the years-long connection I built with Clementine, seeing her finally get a chance at happiness was one of the most satisfying video game endings of my entire life. And finally, my favorite game of 2018, The Witcher. I think this game is a perfect example of my mindset as a gamer and why I value immersion so much. There are a ton of objective negatives you could throw at Witcher 1. The weird character models, the pacing nightmare that is chapter 2, and the notorious rhythm game combat system. But honestly, none of that bothered me. The combat was confusing at first, while I figured out the exact mouse clicking timing, but once it clicked, the game was pure joy. Whenever I dive into a massive franchise, I have to play games in chronological order. Even when they aren't narratively connected, like Far Cry, I still play them in order. But with Witcher, they are connected, and playing them in order enhances the experience tenfold. Right away, a couple of concepts stood out to me. I love that you can only gather materials if Geralt actually has the knowledge. Did you read the book about a specific herb? Great! Now you can recognize and pick it in the wild. Did you kill a new monster? Cool, but you don't know anything about its anatomy, so you can't loot it unless you read up on it or fight it enough times to gain practical knowledge. The Witcher constantly rewards curiosity. Knowledge isn't just something you collect, it changes how you interact with the world. And of course, the romance cards were very fun, classic addition to the journey. But the two things that made this my number one are questing and the story. Like I mentioned with Risen, I love a lack of handholding. To progress a quest, you have to talk to people. Someone might mention a lady in the swamp who holds the answers. Instead of following a glowing line on the compass, you think, oh, I know exactly who that is and how to get there, because I actually took the time to learn the environment. The game has a map, but it rarely highlights exact locations, forcing you to memorize the world. Even after all these years, I could boot up The Witcher and easily navigate straight to the Vivaldi's bank or the swamp lady without a tracker, because I actually lived in that world. And the story itself is incredible. It starts with the criminal syndicate Salamandra attacking Kaer Morgan and stealing the Witcher's secrets. But the narrative masterpiece starts in chapter 1, where you protect an orphan named Alvin. He is a source, possessing a massive magical power, and he occasionally drops into creepy, pathetic trances. Throughout the game, you talk to him, guide him, and teach him about your values and what's right. Eventually, he teleports away when he's in danger and disappears. Now, at the end of the game, you fight the Grand Master, Jacques de Aldesberg. After defeating him, you loot his body and find the exact same amulet you gave to Alvin. It is a legendary plot twist. twist, the tragic irony, is that Alvin teleported into the past, grew up to become the villain, and used your own dialogue choices and lessons to justify creating a mutant army. It is a brilliant storytelling. Plus, if you do the Lady of the Lake quest, you get the Iron Diet, the absolute best silver sword in the game, and uniquely, the only sword you can carry with you through all 3 Witcher games. The Witcher blew my mind at the time, and became my undisputed number 1. And that wraps up my 2018 year of immersion. 2019 is up next, and the backlog is going to get absolutely insane. We'll be continuing our journey through the continent by playing the rest of the legendary Witcher trilogy, facing the ultimate horror in deep space, and diving into one of the weirdest indie hidden gems I've ever encountered. I'd love to hear your picks in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss the 2019 Chronicles. I'll see you then. Soma signing off.